Tracy. I'm on the local board, or I'm actually here to present our first award of the evening. And I have the pleasure of awarding the Hammer of Justice to Cynthia Berger. The ACLU has a long history of fighting for housing rights and equal access to fair housing. When I was researching ACLU cases regarding housing issues, I was a little bit overwhelmed, but I found a few notable cases that I would like to mention. First of all, in 1948, the ACLU supported the African American defendants in the landmark case Shelley v. Kramer. In that ruling, the Supreme Court invalidated contractual agreements among white homeowners not to sell their houses to people of color. Decades later, in 1994, the ACLU of Maryland filed a class action lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, accusing the department of violating the Fair Housing Act by concentrating African American public housing residents into poor, segregated areas of Baltimore City. So that was a pretty controversial case. They actually won, although how it ended up getting dealt with had a long controversial history as well. Over the years, the ACLU has advocated tirelessly for laws prohibiting discrimination in housing on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. And even currently, the ACLU is involved in several legal battles to ensure that victims of domestic and sexual violence aren't additionally burdened by discrimination in housing. With the ACLU's history of fighting for fairness in housing, it's not surprising that the ACLU of Northern California jumped into the 2018 election, weighing in on two ballot proposals aimed at curbing skyrocketing rents and the subsequent gentrification associated with high housing costs. Statewide, all three chapters of the ACLU endorsed Proposition 10 to repeal the Costa-Hawkins Act, a law that limits the extent to which cities and counties can enact local rent control measures. Abdi Soltani, the executive director of the ACLU of Northern California, said, "Without affordable housing, it is impossible to achieve our mission of being a guardian of justice, fairness, equality, and freedom. Restoring the power of local communities to limit rent increases is a key component to making housing affordable for all Californians." Locally, the ACLU of Northern California also voted to endorse Measure M, stating, "The vibrancy and prosperity of Santa Cruz depends on the well-being of all of its residents. When rent is too high, businesses struggle to retain employees and tenants face an increased risk of homelessness. When basic needs aren't met, people are at a greater risk of having their civil liberties violated. They are more likely to be criminalized, to have their property unconstitutionally confiscated, and to experience the unsafe conditions of sleeping and living on the street." For some, and I know people in this room, who found the decision of the ACLU of Northern California to endorse Measure M as surprising and controversial. Yet the decision was based on the stark reality that high housing costs disproportionately affect communities of color. A recent UC Berkeley study found that soaring housing costs are resegregating our communities. So resegregating communities that we have fought really hard to desegregate, but the data are just too damning. The researchers found that across the Bay Area, a 30% increase in median rent corresponded with more than 20% decrease in the number of low-income African Americans, Latinos, and Asians living there. The researchers found no significant relationship between rent increases and loss of low-income white households. The high cost of Santa Cruz housing is similar. There's been a little bit less research, but the No Place Like Home project has done a really good job of tracking how high housing costs are affecting various communities. And they found that Latinx folks are more likely to be rent burdened than white folks. Latinx likely to live in overcrowded conditions, which is often a response to high rents. And Latinx are the most likely demographic to face forced moves and displacement. For a group like the ACLU, who has long fought for justice, equality, and an end to segregated communities, these data were simply too damning, and that's why they ended up agreeing to endorse Measure M. With the failure of both Proposition 10 and Measure M, Santa Cruz County, and indeed the entire state, will need to do some serious soul searching about how to maintain diverse and vibrant communities in the face of a tremendous trend towards gentrification. There are no easy answers to solving the housing crisis. The local ACLU does hope that we can come together as advocates for justice to address the serious challenges that face our community. And I think one thing that pretty much everybody can agree on is the need for tenant advocates who understand and can communicate a tenant's legal rights. Surprisingly, however, tenants have very few legal resources, and tenant advocates who are available and diligent are, they're scarce. And so people who do a really good job of that are an amazingly important asset for increasing housing justice in our community, which is why I am proud to present the Hammer of Justice to Cynthia Berger. Her wonderful son Ezra is right over there. She was struggling to make ends meet with a Section 8 voucher, and her struggles inspired her to begin studying property ownership models, renter organizations, and the power dynamics between property owners and non-owners. Her research led her to the advocacy group Tenants Together, the statewide organization. She did a brief and illuminating internship with them. And working under the direction of Tenants Together organizer Guillermo Elinas, she built a free website, got a Google Voice number for a hotline, and began distributing flyers around the county, starting the Santa Cruz Tenants Association, a bilingual hotline for tenants to get their questions answered and get connected with legal help if they needed it. Initially, the hotline only got a few calls a month. However, the increased need for tenant advocates, as well as the growing reputation of her hotline, meant that she started getting more and more calls. By 2018, the Santa Cruz Tenants Association hotline was getting 1 to 3 calls a day. Answering daily calls from tenants has become a feature of Cynthia's life. She has had to learn a lot on the job, consulting with other tenant organizers and tenant lawyers around the state. For tenants in serious trouble, she is a major source of information and support. And as somebody who is getting evicted from her home of 12 years, I can speak to that and say that Cynthia has answered a lot of questions for me and has been really helpful over the last couple months. So I have a personal connection to Cynthia, and I'm just so happy to be here presenting this award to her. She is extremely knowledgeable. She has immense patience for slogging through tenant law. If she doesn't know the answer to something, she knows where to look, and she's a quick study, making sense out of really wonky and technical publications and journal entries. She is an endless source of information. She catalogs and tracks articles and studies that may be helpful to tenants' needs. And it's amazing if you call her or email her, all of a sudden she's like, oh yeah, I've got this article. It's just amazing that she's able to kind of keep track of all of that just sort of off the top of her head. Maybe it's not off the top of her head, but she makes it seem like it. She's maintained her connections to Tenants Together and is still part of the larger statewide fight for tenants' rights. She even has a grasp on national issues affecting tenants and is able to synthesize national trends in housing and predict how they will affect tenants of Santa Cruz County. I got to know Cynthia because we worked together on the Yes on Measure M campaign, and I have known her to be absolutely dedicated, hardworking, and unwavering in her commitment to justice. Santa Cruz is a better place because she is here doing her tireless work on behalf of renters, and so I am really proud to award the Hammer of Justice.
Well, thank you, Stacy, and thank you to the ACLU local branch for this Hammer of Justice 2019 award. I know I'm in good company. I'd also like to thank all the tenants who participate. I'd also like to thank all the tenants who participate in the local ACLU branch. Nowadays, tenants' voices are missing from such organizations for a variety of reasons, not least of which is the fact that tenants are working at least 2 jobs most of the time. I also participate in, as Stacy mentioned, there's a regional tenant organization for Northern California, and there's a growing tenant movement, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. I did kind of study rent control after it passed in 2 cities in Northern California in 2016, and then I did start a rent control study group in the summer of 2017, but it took off so fast we didn't really have time to study it. Then we might have passed it, but it was a very quick campaign, and rent control usually takes 3 or 4 years to actually pass anywhere where it's, from the time it's first brought up. So working for civil liberties is becoming a luxury and a privilege, in a way. Before we can appreciate and exploit our civil liberties, we need a secure, stable base to move from. We need a shelter. It really helps. It's getting to be really hard for many California renters to think of themselves as long-term tenants. If you look at the upward crawl of rent compared to the flat line of wage growth and income, and then also, there's a housing problem that's not predicted, at least by the developers in the real estate industry, who I think this is what they study. This isn't going to be, there's no time when this will be any better. 50 years, it's going to be for generations because it's gotten so far behind since the mid-70s. So this is an ongoing fight. A little loss doesn't mean anything. A little loss was to be expected. Civil liberties seem to exist in a lofty distance for some people. For renters, getting renters to write an email to the city council recently been criticized because the homeowners had 600 emails, but the renters didn't have more than 10. And this seems like such an easy step for organizers to achieve, but here's why they don't. If you go online and read the emails to the council in any city, the names, emails, and sometimes addresses are available public information. So tenant blacklisting is a real thing. It's so real that the legislature of California made a law against it a couple of years ago. It's not just a made-up thing. So there are, businesses who collect those names from those city council emails, and they sell those names to landlords. I would imagine that mostly the landlords that buy those are larger landlords, but it's a real thing. So no, you're not going to get 600 letters from tenants ever, but you might get them at the meeting. And so that's the time to listen to them. The time to listen to them is when they're in the room, for one thing, if they can get there because they have so many jobs. But so people have to take also into account that if a person is there who's a tenant speaking to the council, they represent a lot more people who can't stand up. I know a landlord who threatened to evict her tenants by calling ICE because they're undocumented. They exist. And there's nothing you can do about it because those people don't want to stand up and raise their hand. Because many people across the country have been arrested at the courthouse when they do that. So tenants are kind of in a squeeze for really getting their rights. And let's just find my place here. Yeah, so, and when you have tenants' rights, like they passed this anti-blacklisting law, great, right? Well, the problem is that for most tenants' rights, the tenants are the enforcers. The tenants themselves are the enforcers. That's not really that helpful. Tenants in myriad small claims cases bear the burden of proof. Unless they have a rent board, there's a lot of different reasons for a rent board. Not just the reasons that whoever wrote against it enumerated. There's a lot of subtle reasons and subtle ways that a rent board can help renters. And so these small claims cases, there are many small claims cases, and the tenants bear the burden of proof. With a rent board, a landlord might bear the burden of proof once in a while. So that's why a rent board is important. That's one reason. In all landlord-tenant cases, about 90% of landlords access an attorney, whether it's a small claims court or a superior court, unlawful detainer. 10% of tenants do that. Tenants make half as much as homeowners overall. And lawyers charge $300 and $400. So a tenant I know just called a lawyer to ask a simple question, which I could have answered for free. They wanted to charge her $400 in Santa Cruz because they needed to do some research. So there are no tenant lawyers in Santa Cruz. There are very few tenant lawyers because they make their bread and butter from big cases. And then I have a tenant lawyer I work with. He's given hundreds of free consultations over the last few years. And he works out of the Bay Area, but he grew up in Santa Cruz. So accessing tenant lawyers is, there aren't very many of them. And besides, you can't take them into court with you anyway, right? So tenants have, then we have legal aid in Santa Cruz County, and it's almost exclusively landlord-tenant cases. And the wait for an appointment in the city for a city resident can be a month or more. You might get a 30-day notice and have an issue with it. You're out of luck. So for the dimensions of the rental crisis, the lack of legal aid for middle class to poor tenants, because middle class people can now qualify for being low income around here, it's kind of criminal. In previous years, the city of Santa Cruz, when lawyers charged less, and when the wage to rent differential was bad, but not excruciatingly horrible like now, the city of Santa Cruz would budget well over $100,000 for CRLA, California Rural Legal Assistance, our legal aid for people who aren't seniors. They get, seniors go to senior legal services. They're also underfunded. But, so in 2017, in the middle of the worst, rental crisis ever, the City Council of Santa Cruz budgeted exactly $0 for legal aid. And then the next year, they budgeted $15,000 for a little, because they had some pressure put on them by activists. And that wasn't enough because the insurance costs were going to eat that up, a lot of that up. So I just, in a conversation with the director of CRLA, Gretchen Regenhart, she said that really to have a good program where you have a lawyer that can do 10 unlawful detainer cases in a year, that's only 10. Thousands of people are being evicted. Some of them are unlawful detainers, but it's more than 10. You need $200,000 to run your business and have 10 unlawful detainer, because an unlawful detainer takes a lot of paper. It's a lot of papering. And so, you want to also be able to offer some tenant counseling, letter writing, and stuff that doesn't involve a lawyer in court. So $200,000 is more like it. And so to get an allocation of that kind of magnitude and to have enforcement that's meaningful, and especially to pass rent control, which is the only act that can stabilize and protect any group of renters, not all renters, but thousands of renters, rather than zero renters, which is what you get if you don't pass rent control. You protect zero renters. So, you've got to organize renters. As difficult as it may be, it's the overarching goal of the late 2000s, the late 2000 teens of California amalgamating tenants movement. Homeowners and landlords have demonstrated the baseline for passing laws favorable to your interests. And they've set an example, a baseline, a goal, and a target for tenants. But reactionary activism hasn't worked. A new political analysis of tenant organizing is currently going on all around the country, and especially, of course, in California. New models are being created, proposed, and discussed of tenant organizing. We're going to figure out exactly how to win rent control campaigns. It's simply, we've observed over the past 2 years the same tactics that were, they pay for a lot of the landlords, California Apartment Association we'll use them as a symbol, but they have a lot of money to pay for a lot of, psychological data about people and how those respond. They did a lot of polling during Measure M with different groups. What should we say to renters to make them afraid to vote against it? What should we say to homeowners? What should we say? So anyway, we are going to learn how to pass rent control, but really the most effective way to do that is just to pass it at the state level. So that will be a larger movement that will be starting up. These things all take time, of course. Yeah, so that's about all I really have to say right now. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.